Oh.
Everybody knows the story about how Michael Jackson wrote the soundtrack for Sonic 3, or didn't write the soundtrack, or did write it and then had his name taken off, or that Sega took his name off because it was embarrassed to be associated with him. Truth is, despite plenty of contradictory theories and evidence, there's no definitive consensus as to precisely what happened. However, what we do know for certain is that Michael Jackson already had an established relationship with Sega long before work began on Sonic 3. It started with the arcade version of Moonwalker, a game in which Jackson could be found collecting children, through to the Mega Drive and Master System interpretations of the game based upon the movie of the same name. Jackson, by all accounts, used to visit Sega of America's offices just to hang out, having fallen hard for Sonic the Hedgehog, who, lest we forget, was at least in part inspired by Jackson himself, or at least his shoes were. Don't stare too long into that puddle, Narcissus. Jackson was known to be an avid gamer who had a huge arcade installed at his Neverland ranch, at a cost of hundreds of thousands of dollars, where he and his young guests could enjoy countless innocent hours away from prying adult eyes. In 2009, shortly before his long overdue death, a financially struggling Jackson put his collection of classic arcade machines up for auction. Jackson's previously huge wealth had afforded him a collection that didn't just include the usual retro gaming suspects, but huge expensive machines like Jambo Safari, Alpine Racer 2, Guitar Freaks, 2 deluxe versions of Crazy Taxi, Top Skater and a Sega R360 machine. Indeed, the catalogue spanned 60 plus pages, though Jackson mysteriously withdrew the auction shortly before it was due to take place.
Oh.
Following the arcade version of Moonwalker, Sega approached Jackson about bringing the game to the Mega Drive and/or Genesis, and Jackson became quite heavily involved in its development, overseeing the way in which he wished to be depicted collecting children. In fact, Sega couldn't get rid of him. According to a 2014 interview with former Sega America boss Tom Kalinske, he would just come up to the office and sit in the R&D area and play different games as they were being developed. What does seem definite, depending on which version of history you choose to believe, is that Jackson approached Sega with a view to creating the Sonic 3 soundtrack, or Sega approached Jackson, perhaps hoping he might go home if he had some work to do. At some point, the singer provided them with a demo featuring his songs for the game. These, according to Sonic designer Naoto Oshima, were a multi-track recording in which every track was hummed by Michael Jackson. Jackson, who couldn't play an instrument, tended to write songs this way, handing demos over to musicians and producers who would then transform his vocal harmonies into music. Jackson's musical director and friend Brad Buxer, whose name is listed in the Sonic 3 credits as one of the game's 6 official composers, told the French magazine Black and White, "I've never played the game, so I do not know what tracks on which Michael and I have worked the developers have kept, but we did compose music for the game. Michael called me at the time for help on this project, and that's what I did. And if he is not credited for composing the music, it's because he was not happy with the sound coming out of the console."
Oh.
Buxer did, however, contradict himself by confirming that the end credits music of Sonic 3 formed the basis of Jackson's 1996 track Stranger in Moscow. Of course, this wouldn't have been the first time that Jackson had chosen to go uncredited. He'd secretly co-written the 1990 Simpsons single Do the Bartman, and appeared anonymously in the 1991 episode of The Simpsons as a mental patient who thought he was Michael Jackson. What makes Jackson's secret involvement with Sonic 3 all the more curious is that, by all accounts, it was never originally meant to be secret.
Oh.
Sega made a big deal of getting Jackson on the Genesis with Moonwalker, making it a key part of its Genesis Does What Nintendo Don't campaign. The biggest pop star in the world working on the latest sequel to Sega's biggest game should have been the sort of thing Sega was shouting about from the rooftops. And yet, nothing. So why not? Why did nobody outside of the Sega and Jackson camps know anything about this in 1993? In fact, the whole nonsense would never have come to light had it not been for the efforts of one Ben Mallinson, a US Sonic fan who happened to be equally obsessed with the music of Michael Jackson. In the mid-noughties, Mallinson found similarities between the Sonic 3 soundtrack and Jackson's music. When he posted about it online, it became a story that just wouldn't go away, and eventually Sega employees started being asked about it in interviews, sometimes confirming elements of the theory. In 2005, a Sonic forum user calling himself HXC interviewed Roger Hector, the executive coordinator of the team that developed Sonic 3, and he stated, "Michael Jackson was originally brought in to compose all the music for the game, but at the very end his work was dropped after his scandals became public. This caused a lot of problems and required a lot of reworking." The scandals in question were the mid-1993 allegations by one Evan Chandler, who claimed that Jackson had abused his 13-year-old son Jordan. Negotiations for a financial settlement between Jackson and the Chandlers were begun in August 1993, a settlement designed to avoid a potential court case that would later be reported as some $23 million. Before this, a criminal investigation began the same month, and the allegations finally went public in late August 1993. Sonic 3 was well into development by this time, with a global release date scheduled for February 1994. Given the need to factor in the manufacture of such a high-profile worldwide release, and then shipping it, this would have left little time for a completely new soundtrack. But equally, leaving Michael Jackson's music in the game and crediting him publicly would have been an embarrassment for Sega, not least given its young audience. Even though prosecutors dropped the case against Jackson a month before the release of Sonic 3, following Jordan Chandler's $23 million decision not to testify, Sega kept Jackson's involvement a secret, and as time went on, Sega appeared determined to keep it that way. In 2008, when approached for a comment on the matter by the website Sega 16, the previously chatty Roger Hector told him he was no longer able to speak about it. I have recently been asked not to comment on this subject as promises of confidentiality were made. It was the case that Michael Jackson was a big fan of the Sonic games, and he did make a visit to STI once to say hi to the team, but I guess the rest will remain unconfirmed rumours. That same year, Howard Drossin, who composed the music for Sonic Spinball and Sonic & Knuckles, told Sonic Retro that he had an uncredited role in the creation of the music for Sonic 3, receiving a special thanks for his work. In fact, he went as far to say this about Michael Jackson. Originally, he was involved, but in the end he ended up with no involvement. I did not do all of the music for the game, however I know that Sega wanted to distance themselves from him after the sex scandal. If MJ's tracks influenced some of the music, it is a coincidence as far as I know. In 2016, Drossin seemed to backtrack further, telling Huffington Post, "There was a lot of music already plugged into it, and as a result, he only apparently changed some of the soundtrack." The most logical conclusion to draw from all these shifting contradictory statements is Sonic 3, despite the presence of other names on the credits, Bobby Brooks, Jeff Grace, Doug Grisby III, Darryl Ross, Brad Buxer and Sirocco Jones are listed as its composers, does feature at least some Michael Jackson music, or at least a version of it that was reworked and finished by other songwriters including Howard Drossin, not least because all the composers listed are all known Michael Jackson collaborators. Musical collaborators, I should clarify. Indeed, Sirocco Jones lists collaborating with the King of Pop, Michael Jackson, for the Sega video game Sonic the Hedgehog on his website. Doug Grisby III backed this up, telling Huffington of the tracks he worked on with Jackson, "The stuff we had it in, the stuff we did made it to the game." The final word in the Huffington Post piece would appear to come from Sega's Roger Hector, once more comfortable with talking openly about Sonic 3. He told the site that Sega was given a finished soundtrack by Jackson's team around summer 1993. "I was really impressed with how much of a signature Michael Jackson sound there was, and yet it was all new. It clearly had a Michael Jackson sound to it so that anyone who listened to it would recognise that, gee, that was done by Michael Jackson." The official line from Tom Kalinske has similarly changed over time. At one point he denied Jackson's involvement altogether, then stated that yes, Jackson did approach them, but there was never a formal contract, that he had no knowledge of Jackson's involvement, and that Jackson for some reason provided his demo on spec. Yet in 2014, when asked directly about it during a Reddit AMA, Kalinsky's line was, "By legal agreements, I'm not allowed to answer this question." He offered a little more detail in another interview the same year. "There were decisions made that were created by Michael and his lawyers, and basically it was neutral. It wasn't Sega's idea that we would dissociate from them at all. There were many factors involved and several different aims involved, and the decision was neutral that until he resolved his legal issues, which he was quite confident he was going to be able to do, that we should all stop collaborating together for a short period of time, and that's basically what happened."
Oh.
If Jackson's music wasn't featured in Sonic 3, why is there such secrecy surrounding it? Why are there so many conflicting statements? Why the need for there to be legal threats and hush-hush deals? Some theories suggest that the muddy involvement of Jackson with Sonic 3 may be why the game has received less promotion in the years since its release, and why there hasn't been a Sonic 3 HD remaster. It may also be why only certain musical themes from Sonic 3 have been revisited in subsequent games, like Sonic Pocket Adventure, Sonic Generations and Sonic Mania, and why Sonic 3 was missing entirely in the 2018 Mega Collection Sega Mega Drive Classics, despite the presence of every other Sonic Mega Drive game barring the Sonic 3 follow-up Sonic & Knuckles. The three pieces of Sonic 3 music believed most likely to have been written by Jackson, in collaboration with Buxer, are the Stranger in Moscow end titles theme, the Carnival Night Zone music, which bears a similarity to the Jackson track Jam, and the music for the Ice Cap Zone. So why are these songs still in the game, and why doesn't it use Jackson's entire score? Adding further mystery to the matter, in 2010 reports surfaced that there was some unspecified legal issue regarding the soundtrack. So Rocco Jones reportedly told a member of the Sonic Retro forums, "I believe that there is a lawsuit going on or about to go on. Sega owes a lot of people money from the Sonic stuff." Bobby Brooks, another of Michael Jackson's stable of producer engineers, was less forthcoming when approached by the same user. "What do you want from me? Why do you want to know? You can contact my lawyer. First off, I don't know who you are or what you really want. You don't have anything to do with my personal biz, so why would I just give info to a stranger while I'm in the middle of some legal shit? 'Tis my personal biz, so if you don't mind, quit asking me about my biz." What few know about is that Sonic 3 wasn't the only Sega game to be affected by the Jordan Chandler scandal. The same year the story broke, Jackson could also be seen in a pair of rides for Sega's AS1 motion simulator arcade machine, Michael Jackson in Scramble Training and Megalopolis Tokyo City Battle. The former was quietly removed from arcades altogether, while the latter dropped Jackson from the ride's introduction video. Other Michael Jackson arcade games were also rumoured to have been in the early stages of discussion, but those also slipped away as Jackson's star fell from grace. Evidently, there was a concerted and understandable effort on Sega's part to distance itself from Michael Jackson, and that the decision was, at least in part, not that of the singer. However, this wasn't the end of the King of Pop's involvement with Sega, as the scandals died down and some years before his 2005 trial for child sexual abuse, of which he was acquitted of all charges, Jackson attempted to re-establish his relationship with the company, asking to be involved in 1999's Dreamcast release Space Channel 5. His offer came so late in the development process that he was only able to feature in a brief cameo as Space Michael, before being given an expanded role in the sequel 3 years later. It wasn't the end of Jackson games either. A year after his death, Ubisoft released Michael Jackson The Experience, a karaoke dance simulator thing on every format known, and it became a massive success, selling to millions of the singer's grieving fans despite receiving mixed reviews and continued widespread suspicion over how the singer may have lived his life. In 2011, SEE Digital Studios announced Planet Michael, an MMORPG inspired by the live videos and music of the singer that would be focused on Jackson's dance moves and adhere to his credo of non-violence. Since 2012, SEE Digital Studios has never mentioned it again. Suffice to say, given that allegations regarding Jackson's behaviour with the young children refused to go away, that might be the end of the legendary singer's relationship with games. A relationship and a legacy which has unfortunately not escaped unscathed, and clearly continues to cause headaches for Sega to this day. Nevertheless, when Jackson died, the company issued the following statement. "We here at Sega were very sad to hear about the passing of Michael Jackson, who was a true music legend whose songs touched each of us at some point in our lives.
Oh.
We are proud to have worked with him and included his music in some of our most well-remembered games, and are sure that his genius will live on through his great body of work. We have no doubt that future generations will be moonwalking to all his greatest hits." Yeah, well, providing you forget about all the abuse allegations and that.